1. So far in this book, we have learned that the main character, his name is Lucas. He lives close to New York City. Both his dad and his uncle are firefighters for New York City, and Lucas loves to play football. Like, he loves football. He is 11 years old, but while in practice one day, he gets a concussion. And after he and his mom visited a special doctor, the doctor said that Lucas should not play football anymore because he's gotten 3 concussions in the last 2 years. Well, Lucas obviously does not like this news at all, and he begs his parents to let him keep playing. They refuse to let him play, and so one day he skips school. On September 11th, actually, he skips school and goes into New York City to visit his uncle, who is working at the firehouse, and to try to convince his uncle to let his parents let him play football again. But he finds out that his uncle is actually agreeing with his parents, and so now he's continuing to be upset. But then, as he and his uncle are talking about football and everything, they look up and they see a plane flying very low in the sky, and they watch it as the plane crashes into what is called the Twin Towers. They are no longer in New York City anymore. But if you ask your parents about what happened on 9/11, that's what we usually call September 11th. They can tell you all about the Twin Towers. The World Trade Center is what they were called. You see pictures of them here on the cover. But it was basically between just a little after 8 o'clock and then just after 9 o'clock. There were 2 planes that crashed into the North and the South Towers in New York City. Both the towers were 110 stories tall, or maybe a little taller than that, but they were some of the tallest buildings in the world. And you see Benny and his dad race to help rescue people from the buildings, because as you can see in the picture, there's an explosion happening in the building. And so what do firefighters do? They rescue people from fires. And so that's where we left off. We left off with the South Tower, with the plane crashing into the South Tower. And so let's read chapters 9 and 10 together. Chapter 9. Lucas tried calling Mom again. Now, when he called, he got a fast busy signal and a recording. All circuits are busy. He tried Dad's phone. Same thing. He dialed over and over. Mom, Dad, Mom, Dad. He just kept getting the busy signal. The department radio crackled. Recall, recall, the dispatcher said. All personnel on duty off are to report. I repeat, this is a recall of all emergency personnel. There were 11,000 firefighters in the department. They needed every single one. Before Lucas knew what he was doing, he had run out into the street. He couldn't be alone, watching the world fall apart on TV. He needed to find Dad and Uncle Benny and the rest of the men. He wanted to be with them. He knew he wasn't thinking clearly. He didn't know if he'd even be able to get close to where they were, if it was even safe to try. But he went anyway. Some kind of attack. Some kind of attack. Was that man on TV right? What did that even mean? Who was attacking? Did he mean that those planes had hit the towers on purpose? The thought hadn't even come to Lucas's mind when he saw the first plane hit. But thinking about it now, of course, that was the only thing that made sense. The day was so perfectly clear. There were no way that 2 airplanes could have hit the towers unless they had been aiming right for them. But who could be insane enough, evil enough, to fly planes into buildings? Lucas wiped away the tears running down his face. He wove through the crowds of people on the sidewalk. Some were running north, but most seemed like they were in shock, standing there, dazed, staring at the fires above them. The only noise was sirens, hundreds of them, honking and screaming, wailing and shrieking and blaring. The sounds all crashed together into one terrible song. The crowd of people huddled around something in the middle of the street. Lucas slowed down and looked. It was a big tire attached to a tangle of metal. It didn't look like the tire of a truck or of a car or truck. What is that? A woman said. It's part of a plane, said the man. It's the landing gear. Lucas looked away. He pushed toward the crowd heading south, Vesey and West Streets. That's where the staging area was, where the firefighters were gathering. If Dad had made it here from Randall's Island, that's where Lucas would find him. He would look for the Seagrave. He would wait there for Dad. Lucas inched through the crowd. Most people were standing still, watching. But now there were more people coming from the direction of the towers. Some of them were soaked in sweat, their clothes tattered. But it was the looks on their faces, stunned and horrified, that told Lucas where they had come from, inside the towers. There were dozens and dozens of them, some walking alone, others holding hands. Some of the women were barefoot. He imagined their high-heeled shoes kicked into the corners of the stairwells. Nobody was carrying a purse or a briefcase, and Lucas understood why. He'd heard many stories about people who had survived fires and explosions and collapses. So many times they'd escaped with not a second to spare. If they had stopped for anything, to grab a purse or a tie or a shoe, they wouldn't have made it. A policeman up ahead was trying to stop people from moving south. "Everyone, please leave this area," he shouted. "It's not safe. Please leave this area and head north." But Lucas kept walking, and nobody tried to stop him. He felt invisible. Ladder 177 had to be one of the first units to get to the towers. That meant they'd be the closest. Lucas was still 3 blocks away when he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Hey," a young policeman said. "Where are you going? Are you lost?" "I need to find," and before he could get the words out, he heard someone calling his name. "Lucas!" His name rose up over all the sirens. "Dad!" And there was his dad pushing through the crowd. He grabbed Lucas and held him tight. For a few seconds, Lucas couldn't hear the sirens. All he could hear was the beating of Dad's heart. Chapter 10. 9:50 a.m. Dad told Lucas that he'd driven to Manhattan from Randall's Island as soon as the first plane hit. "I was going to head right to the scene," Dad said, "but I got the message that you were at the firehouse, so I went there first. Chief said he'd be waiting for me." "I'm sorry," Lucas said. I just couldn't stay. Dad held up his hand. There was no time to talk, and Lucas got the idea that nothing that had happened before this morning mattered anymore. Not now, maybe not ever again. "We need to find the guys. I need to get my gear from the truck, and then I'm going to find someone to take you back to the firehouse." Lucas didn't want to go back there, but he didn't argue. They're not going to be able to put the fires out," Dad said. "This is rescue operation now. We just want to get all the people out of there." Dad's walkie-talkie crackled. Muffled voices mixed with static came through. Dad kept switching channels, trying to hear. He swore under his breath. Nobody can talk to anyone. These radios have never worked, and now people are totally shut off. Nobody can get through to the men in the towers. They passed a pickup truck. The back was completely smashed, and a jet engine was still smoking. Sat on the ground just behind it. The driver's door was open. Someone had been in the car when it was hit and had gotten away. "Lucky," Dad said as he pulled Lucas along past the truck. 1 mile per hour slower than the entire cab would have been crushed. There were people sitting on the sidewalks, being treated by paramedics. Some were in bad shape. Lucas tried to keep his eyes straight ahead. A woman staggered up to Dad. Her gray hair was soaked with sweat. Her face was bright red with streaks of black under her eyes. She was breathing very hard, her hand on her chest. "Can you help me?" she gasped. "My heart. I came down the stairs. My friends. I don't know where they are. There was so much smoke." Lucas knew Dad didn't want to stop. He wanted to find his crew. "Okay," Dad said in a low and gentle voice. "Don't worry. We're going to get you what you need." He turned to Lucas, pointing to an ambulance a few yards away. "Tell one of the paramedics we need help over here." Lucas ran over and told one of the paramedics, then hurried back to sit with Dad and the woman. Dad kept talking to her while they waited. He introduced himself and asked for her name and about her family. The woman was gripping Dad's arm so tightly that her fingernails were digging into his skin. Dad didn't budge. He kept talking to her, trying to calm this person he'd never met before and would probably never see again. Finally, the paramedics came. A minute later, they had the woman on a stretcher and into an ambulance. Dad and Lucas continued their search for ladder 177, but suddenly there was a deep roaring noise. The ground trembled. Dad stopped short. He looked around. His eyes flew up. He grabbed Lucas by the arm and shouted, "Run!" Lucas had no idea what was happening, but suddenly there was the loudest noise he'd ever heard. louder than 100 freight trains, louder than all those sirens. What is it? Lucas cried, his voice cracking with terror. Dad pulled Lucas along, shouting, "Run, run!" to the people all around. Dad kept looking over his shoulder, pulling Lucas harder, urging him to move faster. They came to a convenience store and Dad pushed the door open. He threw Lucas inside, then they called to the people just behind him. "In here," he called. "Hurry, hurry!" Just a few people followed. Then Dad slammed the door shut. "Everyone get down, cover your heads." Lucas dove to the ground and then, whoosh! There was the sound of shattering glass and a powerful blast of wind. Minutes passed. Lucas squeezed his eyes shut and covered his ears, his mouth and nose filled with gray dust. It was hard to breathe. If he hadn't known better, he would have been sure that he was in the middle of a tornado, a boiling hot tornado. And suddenly the noise and wind stopped. There was silence. Lucas opened his eyes, but he couldn't see anything. All around was pure darkness. For a long time, he was pretty sure the world had ended, and that he was the only person left on Earth. And that's where we're getting today. Like I've encouraged you guys past several weeks to make sure you ask your parents about their experience on 9/11. I was not in New York City, but I was alive and I was in school when this happened. I know exactly what I was doing when we got the announcement that the towers were